They've been a part of New York City for as long as anyone can remember. Brown rats, originally from northern China, arrived on trade ships in the late 1700s. Today, an estimated 3 million of them live beneath the city's streets. And despite decades of efforts, no program has been able to slow them down.
For more than a century, New York City tried everything to kill its rats. Poison, a toxic chemical assault in the streets, traps, mechanical devices set in every dark corner, dry ice pumped directly into burrows. A dedicated rat czar chosen from 900 applicants, earning $176,000 a year to coordinate the war. A $3.5 million annual extermination budget. Even a contraceptive pill engineered specifically for rodents. Season after season, the numbers climb. Survey after survey confirmed the same trajectory. In 2014, Animal Planet named New York the worst rat city in the world. By 2023, researchers estimated 3 million rats across the 5 boroughs. Roughly 1 for every 3 New Yorkers. The rats kept winning. Then something shifted. Not everywhere, not dramatically, but consistently in specific parks, specific neighborhoods, specific corridors. The metric that had only ever moved in one direction started moving the other way. Nobody ordered it. No official city directive was ever issued. No new extermination program had launched. No budget increase explained it. When researchers traced what was actually happening in those corridors, the answer pointed to a decision made in 1972 that had absolutely nothing to do with rats. A predator that the city had spent decades accidentally killing was quietly returning. And it was doing what no extermination program had ever managed to do. New York City's 311 system has been recording rat sightings since the early 2000s. Millions of individual reports, geocoded by address, time-stamped by date. It is one of the most comprehensive urban rodent monitoring data sets in the world, generating the kind of longitudinal population signal that researchers in other cities can only estimate. For most of that record, the data told a familiar story. Rat complaints held steady in winter, spiked in summer, and trended upward year over year. The trajectory was so consistent that city agencies built their resource allocation models around it. The line only moved in one direction. Then something appeared in the data that the models didn't predict.
New York City is reporting a major win in its war on rats. Sighting complaints dropped over 20% in the past year, a decline officials are crediting to the mayor's containerization program. But some wildlife researchers are pointing to a different explanation. They believe a native predator, one the city nearly wiped out decades ago, may be quietly doing what no extermination program ever could.
Between 2019 and 2023, before the major containerization mandates took full effect, 311 rat sighting reports in certain Manhattan and Brooklyn neighborhoods began declining at rates that didn't align with any active intervention in those areas. The Bronx showed a similar pattern, not citywide, localized. Specific corridors showing drops that the pest control calendar couldn't account for. When the Adams administration's trash revolution kicked in, sealed bins for food businesses in August 2023, residential containerization mandates in November 2024, the citywide numbers fell further. A 20% decline across 12 straight months. The mayor declared victory. The rat czar quietly resigned. And the official story was clean. Containerization works. But the containerization timeline didn't explain the earlier declines. Sealed bins don't explain why rat burrow density dropped in Central Park's North Woods 3 years before any bin mandate existed. Trash policy doesn't explain why the steepest, most sustained local declines were consistently clustering around the same geographic feature: large urban parks, mature tree canopy, and something else the data wasn't designed to track: the city's own rat mitigation zones. The neighborhoods receiving the most aggressive extermination resources were not generating the steepest drops. The parks were. Something was operating in those corridors. Something that had been building quietly for years before anyone thought to look for it. Here is the detail that reframes everything that came before it. New York City, the most densely populated urban environment in America, has quietly become one of the most significant raptor habitats in the northeastern United States. Not despite the density, because of it. It started with a single bird. In the early 1990s, a pale-colored red-tailed hawk took up residence above Fifth Avenue, perching on the cornice of a luxury co-op across from Central Park. New Yorkers named him Pale Male. He nested, he bred. He became the most famous wild bird in the city's history. Children's books were written about him. A documentary was filmed. When the building's co-op board removed his nest in 2004, the public outcry was so fierce that the board was forced to reinstall it. Pale Male is now in his 30s. Most wild red-tailed hawks live 10 to 12 years. He has outlived every projection, and what began with one anomalous bird has become something no urban ecologist predicted. Red-tailed hawks now maintain an estimated 15 to 20 breeding pairs across all 5 boroughs. They nest on building ledges, bridge supports, church steeples, and water towers. Multiple pairs breed on human-made structures that mimic the cliff faces where the species naturally nests. But hawks are not the only ones. 3 owl species, great horned, barn, and screech, now nest in the city's largest parks. Peregrine falcons, once nearly extinct from pesticide exposure, have recovered to the point where New York City is believed to host the largest urban peregrine population in the world. Bald eagles became year-round residents and fledged young on Staten Island for the first time in 2017. These are not visitors passing through. These are established, breeding, territorial apex predators, living inside the 5 boroughs, hunting every night. And what do they eat? The city's own wildlife unit documented the answer. Red-tailed hawks in rural areas eat squirrels and rabbits. Red-tailed hawks in New York City eat rats, mice, and pigeons. As one researcher put it, the average red-tailed hawk in New York City has never seen or killed a rabbit. The urban prey base is rodents. That is what sustains the population. Great horned owls operate the night shift. Their talons generate 28 pounds of crushing force, enough to snap a rat's spine on contact. Their flight is near silent. Specialized feather structure disrupts air turbulence. A rat on a park path at 2 in the morning does not hear the owl that kills it. Now, here is the part that changes how you think about the entire problem. Extermination programs, poison programs, trapping programs, they all target adult rats. Rats that have already fed, already burrowed, already reproduced. Raptors don't target adults in subway tunnels or building basements. They can't reach them there. What they target is something no city program has ever been able to reach at scale: juvenile rats. Young rats in their first weeks of life, emerging from park-adjacent burrows, foraging in open green space at dawn and dusk. They are smaller, they are slower, they are exposed, and they concentrate in exactly the habitat where a hawk perched on a lamppost, scanning the grass line with vision 8 times sharper than a human's, can take them repeatedly across an entire breeding season without expending significant energy. Multiply that across a growing population of raptors distributed through connected park systems: Central Park, Prospect Park, Van Cortlandt, Pelham Bay, Riverside, Inwood Hill. You are no longer talking about individual predation events. You are talking about continuous, systematic suppression of juvenile rat survival, operating at exactly the life stage that determines whether a local population grows, holds steady, or begins to decline. Extermination programs target adults after the damage is already done. Predators target the pipeline before it delivers. In 1972, the United States Environmental Protection Agency banned DDT. The decision was made to save bald eagles and peregrine falcons. The pesticide was thinning their eggshells to the point of reproductive collapse. Entire species were approaching extinction. The ban was framed entirely around wildlife conservation, around preventing the loss of animals that had been part of American ecosystems for thousands of years. Nobody in that regulatory process was thinking about rats. Nobody mentioned urban rodent control. Nobody calculated what would happen if raptors were allowed to recover in the most densely populated city in the country. It took decades. Peregrine falcons didn't begin recovering in New York until the 1980s, when intensive captive breeding programs placed young birds on Manhattan skyscrapers. structures that mirrored the cliff faces where the species naturally nests. Red-tailed hawks didn't establish significant urban breeding populations until the mid-1990s. 3 owl species followed as park habitats matured. Each recovery happened independently. Wildlife agencies tracked raptors. Pest control agencies tracked rats. Nobody cross-referenced the datasets. Nobody was designed to. That institutional separation, the fact that predator conservation and rodent management operated as entirely parallel programs with no communication between them, is what allowed the effect to build for nearly 3 decades before anyone noticed what was happening in the parks. And then the city killed its most famous predator. In February 2023, a Eurasian eagle owl named Flaco escaped from the Central Park Zoo after someone cut the mesh on his enclosure. For 13 months, he lived wild in Manhattan. He hunted rats from fire escapes and water towers. New Yorkers tracked his movements like a celebrity. He became a symbol of something the city didn't know it wanted: wildness, persisting in the most controlled landscape on Earth. In February 2024, Flaco flew into a building and died. The necropsy found 4 different anticoagulant rodenticides in his body. The poison the city deploys to kill rats had accumulated in the predator that was killing them naturally. Flaco was not the first, and he was not an exception. In 2021, a barred owl named Barry, beloved in Central Park, died with potentially lethal levels of rat poison in her system. The Wild Bird Fund, New York's primary wildlife rehabilitation center, reported that the vast majority of raptors that die in the city test positive for rodenticide. Hundreds of hawks, owls, and falcons, animals most New Yorkers never knew were there, poisoned the same way. Not by eating poison directly, by eating rats that had eaten poison. The toxin bioaccumulates. A hawk consumes a poisoned rat. The anticoagulant enters its bloodstream. If the dose isn't immediately lethal, it causes internal bleeding, immune suppression, impaired thermoregulation, and reproductive failure. Over time, each poisoned meal weakens the predator that would otherwise be suppressing the prey population the poison was designed to eliminate. The city had been running a rat suppression program and a predator elimination program at the same time. It just didn't know it. Here is the problem that sits underneath all of this. Second-generation anticoagulant rodenticides are the most common class of rat poison used in New York City. They are sold commercially. They are deployed by licensed pest control operators. They are placed in bait stations on sidewalks, in basements, beside dumpsters, in parks, and along building foundations across all 5 boroughs. They don't stay in the rat. The New York State Department of Environmental Conservation monitored anticoagulant poisoning of non-target wildlife for 26 years, from 1971 through 1997. Their records documented case after case. Half of the confirmed non-target poisoning incidents involved raptors, hawks, owls, falcons. The rest included squirrels, raccoons, foxes, skunks, and opossums, the broader predator community that collectively generates natural rodent suppression. Every one of those animals, dead from eating a poisoned rat, represents suppression pressure removed from the ecosystem, pressure that won't return until another predator matures, establishes territory, and begins hunting in that same corridor. For a red-tailed hawk, that replacement cycle takes years. The natural predator population moves on a timeline measured in breeding seasons and territory establishment. A hawk pair needs years to produce offspring that will establish their own hunting range. The rodenticide industry moves on a timeline measured in municipal contracts and lobbying cycles. And rat reproduction moves on a timeline measured in weeks. A single female brown rat can produce up to 15,000 descendants in a single year under favorable conditions. In September 2024, the New York City Council voted unanimously to pass Flaco's law. The legislation created a pilot program to test rat contraceptives as an alternative to poison in 2 neighborhoods within the city's rat mitigation zones. It was an acknowledgement, a beginning. But a pilot program in 2 neighborhoods does not protect the hawk, whose hunting territory spans 12 square miles. The red-tailed hawk does not know to only eat rats from the pilot zone. The great horned owl does not check which block the rat came from before breaking its spine. A state Senate bill to restrict public sales of second-generation anticoagulants was introduced in 2025. Its legislative findings cited Flaco's death by name. As of today, its path to full enactment remains incomplete. The arithmetic underneath all of this is uncomfortable but precise. Every year the city continues deploying the poisons that kill the predators. It is actively subsidizing the survival of the prey it is trying to eliminate. While the policy debate continued, something was already happening on the ground. New York City Parks Wildlife Unit began systematically tracking raptor nests across the 5 boroughs starting in 2019. Nest locations, breeding success, fledgling counts, species distribution. 15 pairs of red-tailed hawks were documented nesting on human-made structures in the first year alone. That data, when laid alongside the geocoded 311 rat sighting reports, revealed a pattern that was difficult to dismiss. The park sections showing the steepest and most sustained declines in rat activity were not the sections receiving the most aggressive extermination pressure. They were not the sections closest to the containerization pilot zones. They were not the sections where the rat czar's office had focused its resources. They were the sections with established raptor nesting territory. Central Park's North Woods, home to multiple red-tailed hawk pairs, and documented great horned owl nesting sites, showed measurable rat burrow decline years before any container mandate existed. Prospect Park, where the Parks Department made a quiet decision to suspend rodenticide use during raptor breeding season after documenting its effect on hawk mortality, saw both raptor fledgling success increase and rat complaint density decrease in the same corridors. The parks where predators were most protected were the parks where rats were declining fastest. And then there was a predator nobody expected. Coyotes are not native to New York City. They are native to the Great Plains and the American Southwest. But over the past 70 years, eastern coyotes have been migrating steadily into the northeastern United States, filling the ecological niche left empty when wolves were eliminated from the region centuries ago. By 2023, New York City Parks confirmed something that most New Yorkers had no idea was happening. Coyotes were not just visiting, they were breeding. In Van Cortlandt Park and Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx, confirmed coyote families were denning, raising pups, and establishing territory. At least 20 coyotes now roam the 5 boroughs. They are the largest land predators in the city, and their diet in this environment prominently includes rodents. In Bronx Park zones with confirmed coyote presence, rat activity signals dropped compared to adjacent zones without confirmed coyote territory. One species, largely unmanaged, already generating measurable effect without any human program directing it. What the data was beginning to reveal was not a story about any single predator solving New York's rat problem. It was something structurally different and far more significant. A recovering predator community. Hawks hunting at dawn, owls hunting at midnight, falcons intercepting pigeons that compete with rats for the same food sources, coyotes patrolling parkland edges, each species operating on a different schedule, in slightly different habitat, targeting slightly different prey sizes, collectively generating the kind of distributed, continuous, multi-species suppression pressure that no single extermination technology has ever produced. The key variable was not how many predators were present, it was how long they had been established. Birds old enough, territorial enough, and connected enough to the local habitat to be functioning as permanent apex predators in the specific corridors where juvenile rats are most exposed. Establishment, not abundance, was what the data tracked to. By 2024, park surveys in New York City began recording something that urban ecologists had not expected to observe in a metropolitan environment. In park sections where raptors were most established and rat pressure had measurably declined, small songbird nesting success was incrementally improving. Warblers, wrens, sparrows, species whose ground-level nests are raided by rats. In corridors where rat density had dropped, more fledglings were surviving to leave the nest. This is the beginning stage of what ecologists call a trophic cascade, a chain reaction triggered by a change at one level of a food web that propagates through the entire system. When raptor predation reduces juvenile rat survival in a park corridor, fewer rats reach the population density that suppresses ground-nesting birds. With fewer rats raiding nests, more songbird chicks survive. More songbirds means more insect predation, which supports the invertebrate balance that sustains soil health and plant diversity. Healthier plant communities stabilize habitat for the next generation of both predators and prey. Nobody is claiming these parks are returning to some pre-colonial baseline. Nobody working this data is saying that. But in specific corridors, something is measurably shifting. In places where rat dominance was unquestioned for decades, localized biological resilience is appearing. And the distinction is the whole point. Extermination removes rat biomass temporarily. If the food source remains and the predators remain suppressed by the same poisons designed to kill the rats, the population rebuilds within months. Every poison cycle resets the clock. Predator-driven recruitment suppression is structurally different. It operates continuously. It requires no recurring municipal budget. It targets the juvenile pipeline that determines whether a population grows or contracts. And it strengthens over time as predator populations breed, establish territory, and expand their range. For more than a century, New York City treated its rat problem as a pest control challenge, a problem to be solved with chemicals, contracts, and a $176,000 a year coordinator who ultimately served 2.5 years before quietly resigning. Now, in corridors where native predators have returned through a convergence of conservation decisions that were never designed to produce this outcome, the ecosystem is doing something the extermination industry never could. It is responding. Nobody planned for red-tailed hawks to be part of the answer to New York's rat crisis. Nobody coordinated the DDT ban with urban rodent management. Nobody at the EPA in 1972 ran the projection showing that, 50 years later, a self-sustaining population of breeding raptors in the most densely populated city in America would be generating measurable suppression of the species that every municipal program had failed to control. The city figured it out anyway. The question the data is now forcing is not whether the biological mechanism works. The nesting surveys, the 311 sighting data, the rodenticide mortality records, and the coyote territory discoveries all point in the same direction. The question is whether New York will stop poisoning its own solution before the window closes. Every bait station loaded with second-generation anticoagulant is a bet against the predators. Every hawk that dies from eating a poisoned rat is a decade of territorial suppression pressure lost. Every breeding pair eliminated is a corridor returned to the rats. The most expensive rat in New York City is not the one that survives the poison. It's the one that carries it into the hawk. If you want more stories where nature produces answers nobody was looking for, subscribe and follow. Because what's unfolding in these